Hi, and welcome to our food safety presentation for muscadine grapes. Muscadines are an agricultural commodity that are commonly consumed raw, so food safety practices are of paramount importance both in the vineyard as well as during harvest. If you own, manage, or work at a vineyard, we'll be covering important food safety topics like personnel, agricultural, and sanitation practices. I'm Kate Nicholas with NC State Extension, and today I'm going to be joined by my two colleagues, Chip Simmons and Lynette Johnston. So first, we're going to talk about personnel practices in your vineyard. Both food safety and your employees will go hand in hand as a first line of defense for food safety of your grapes. First and foremost, keep in mind that all of your employees, full-time, part-time, and seasonal employees must have job-specific food safety training related to the activities that they'll be performing in your vineyard. When you're conducting this training, be sure to document topics as well as keep that documentation in case it's ever needed for a later audit or inspection. Now, since most of our grapes are hand harvested at some point during the season, hand washing is a paramount important topic to cover. So when you're doing your training on proper hand washing, be sure to include the locations of your hand washing stations and the appropriate steps for adequate and safe hand washing. Hand washing facilities for both washing hands prior to harvesting as well as hand washing facilities that might be in the vineyard need to be adequately stocked with the proper materials. What we mean by that is clean, potable water, hand soap, and a way for employees to dry their hands. Another training topic that's important is a sick policy. Employees need to know the symptoms of illness and when they need to be excluded from either harvesting or processing activities. This is another documented training activity that you can use for your records. Finally, are you a pick-your-own facility? Are you allowing guests to come into your vineyard? Here's some helpful tips that will help protect not only your vineyard, but also your guests related to food safety. First and foremost, when your guests come onto your vineyard, have them sign in and have them acknowledge that they've read and understand the food safety requirements that you're expecting them to follow when they're in your vineyard. You can have clear posted signage like what you see behind me, allowing guests to know what areas of the vineyard they should be excluded from. Finally, are you trying to reduce the likelihood of guests eating directly off the vine? Be sure to have some clean, washed grapes ready for them to try, either when they arrive or upon their departure.
So now that we've learned about workers and visitors to the farm, we should really consider some of the factors that might introduce risks during the production out in the vineyard. One of those would be wildlife, or more specifically, the feces from wildlife. When we think about wildlife, we really are interested in deer, rabbits, and birds. Because the vines are up off the ground, we're less concerned with the fecal matter from deer or from rabbits. And in that aspect, it's really a cross-contamination issue. For wildlife, our biggest concern would be birds. So some of the things that we should consider might be trees, for the birds, that then could have droppings on the grapes in the vineyard. Some of the control measures that we should consider might be fencing to keep deer or rabbits out, or netting that we would use to keep the birds out. One of the other factors that we should consider is probably water. Water, it can be used for irrigation or it could be used for foliar sprays. When we think about water, we think about three primary aspects that would impact how that might affect the fruit. the source and the quality of that water, the application of the water, the application method, as well as the timing of that in relation to harvest. For the source and the quality, most often vineyards are going to use either groundwater or filtered surface water. The best way to know the quality of that is to test that water. So far as application method, what we can see here for vineyards that do have irrigation, it's most often drip irrigation that comes through a drip tape. That's a relatively safe application method because there's very little chance for that water to come into contact with the edible or harvestable portion of the crop. The only way that might happen is if there's a break in the drip tape and that water sprays on the vines. In addition to this, we really need to consider foliar sprays. Those foliar sprays, the water that's used to make that up and the quality of that water is very important because that water is likely to come into contact with a harvestable portion of the crop.
Another important factor to consider on every farm and throughout the food industry is your sanitation program, and specifically your cleaning and sanitizing program. So the first thing to consider here are your food contact surfaces. Your food contact surfaces are considered those surfaces that come in direct contact with fresh produce. So they have the highest risk. So surfaces that should be considered are your harvesting equipment, your utensils, and perhaps your harvesting bins, as well as your storage bins as well. So after you've identified your food contact surfaces, it's important to have procedures written for your sanitation practices, such as cleaning and sanitizing. And keep in mind, there are 4 basic steps to cleaning and sanitizing. First, you start with that clean water rinse of the food contact surface, followed by a clean step with the use of a detergent, and then followed again by a clean water rinse, and then following up with a sanitizing step. So we just talk a bit more about those specific steps. Again, you start with a clean water rinse, followed by a detergent. And keep in mind these detergents are widely available, such as Dawn or Simple Green. Just make sure you're following those instructions. And remember, it's very important to consider your cleaning step and take time to do this step correctly, as we can't sanitize a dirty surface. After you've scrubbed, right, and applied that detergent, follow up with a clean water rinse. The final step to consider is your sanitizing step. The purpose of a sanitizing step is to reduce your microbial load, okay? It's very important to read the labels of your sanitizer. Something to note here is that you can buy sanitizers such as Clorox, okay? Make sure you're not using a Clorox that is scented or has additives added to that formulation. So read the label. Make sure you're following that label for food contact surfaces. And consider the contact time as well as the concentration of that chemical. Remember, following that label is indeed the law. So there are examples of sanitizers, might be Clorox, which is widely available, and many farms use Sanidate as well. So after you've applied that sanitizer, in most cases, right, you don't apply a clean water rinse. In most cases, you're going to allow that product to air dry, right? We want to especially think about that when we're nesting, for example, harvest bins, right? Especially don't want to nest those harvest bins when they are indeed wet. Water allows for that for microbial growth. So allow those surfaces to air dry. But keep in mind, some sanitizers may actually require that clean water rinse, and then followed by air drying. So that's our cleaning and sanitizing procedures. Other things to think about in regards to your sanitation program, especially for pick your own markets, okay, would be the type of storage containers or harvesting containers that you're using, right? We can think of this in sort of two categories. Those reusable containers, like plastic containers such as buckets that many pick-your-own markets may use, we call this reusable because they are indeed cleanable and sanitizable. The surface allows for cleaning as well as sanitizing. Other examples of storage bins might be made up of cardboard, or you see the plastic clamshell, or maybe a plastic liner. These would be considered non-reusable because they are indeed made up of surfaces that aren't cleanable nor sanitizable. So these are some key factors when considering your sanitation program on your farm. Make sure you consider these key factors such as food contact surfaces, your cleaning and sanitizing procedures. Those procedures should be written. And then think about the actual containers you're using and answer that question of whether or not they are indeed reusable versus non-reusable surfaces.